Hey everybody, welcome back to BellTube. All right, today we are tier ranking all 63 books that I read in the year 2024. I asked you guys in the community poll if you'd like me to do this, and it was an overwhelming yes. So let's get right into it. First thing that I want to do is go over the names of our tiers because I did customize them today. In what is traditionally the S tier, we are calling the Hall of Heroes. The typical A tier, we are calling Champion's Choice. The typical B tier, we are calling Worthy Chronicle. At the usual C tier, we are going to call it Lost in Space. And the D tier is sadly the Pit of Regret. And of course, as in all tier list videos that happen on BellTube, the very lowest bottom tier is, of course, The Magicians by Lev Grossman. Okay, and I'm kidding, by the way, only slightly. I know some of my best friends on BookTube absolutely put The Magicians in their top 10 of all-time books. Well, obviously, it's the name of the lowest tier. So you guys know what I think about it. All right, let's not waste too much time. I will say that when it comes to tier rating books, I'm going to do a couple of things. Number one, I'm not going to rank them within the tiers themselves. For one, we would be here until March if I were to do that with 63 books. The other thing is that I think that that's usually better for top 10 videos than it is for tier ranking videos, at least for me. So let's get started right off the bat with Terry Pratchett's Men at Arms. This is book 2 in the City Watch arc of Discworld, and we are starting with a bang, folks, because it is going right up, if this works, into the Hall of Heroes. Okay, so Men at Arms was one of my favorite books of 2024, without a doubt. Sir Terry Pratchett, love the sense of humor, love the social commentary. It's Hall of Heroes material for sure. On the other hand, we have Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns, and there are several books that we're going to get to today, about 7 in particular, that were all part of what I called the DNF Challenge back in January of 2024. If you're new to the channel, I asked 7 of my favorite booktubers for a book that they didn't like anywhere at all, and they in fact DNF'd it. I then took those books, read them all, and kind of gave my 2 cents about all of them. Some of them were no surprise, I didn't like him either. Some of them I was entirely blown away with the fact that they got DNF'd, and I really actually kind of liked him. So the first one we're talking about was given to me by Tori over at Tori Talks. This was Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence, and much like Tori thought, right into the Pit of Regret. Didn't like the main character, didn't really like the format of the story. What can I say? If I give commentary on each one of these books, we're going to be here till March. So Prince of Thorns, In the Pit of Regret. Let's talk about The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. I will say I listened to this on audio. This was another DNF challenge. This time this book was given to me by Mike over at Mike's Book Reviews. I will say that The Three-Body Problem reminds me in some fashion of classic sci-fi, only insofar as the real focus of the book is an idea, rather than particular characters. I know that's what caused Mike to bounce off the book, because we can't even call these characters flat. I mean, they're just, flat is 2-dimensional. These are 1-dimensional characters. They're almost just placeholders for the author to move the idea from. I have to say, for me, Three-Body Problem, Lost in Space didn't work for me. I love classic sci-fi, so it's not the fact that I didn't like the ideas, it's just overall didn't work. I loved the game aspect of it, right? So if you're familiar with the book, the game that they play, extremely cool, highly unique and innovative, but the overarching story didn't work. Lost in Space. All right, On a Throne of Lies by Eric Ueland. This is, I want to say, in the Good Guys series, and you're going to get a few books from Eric Ueland on this list, and they're either in the Good Guys series or the Bad Guys series, and they're all read by amazing voice actor Neil Helligers. The challenge that I have for these is that normally the good guys is doing stuff over here in the world and the bad guys is doing stuff over here in the world, and they're really easy to separate in my mind. The trick is, in all three of these books, there's convergence. So we've got characters from both series in both series, and it's all happening essentially in the same main city. So there's a little bit of a blur effect for me, but on a Throne of Lies, I know I gave it 4 stars when I read it, so I'm going to put it in Worthy Chronicle. All right. Now, A Betrayal in Winter is book 2 in the Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. I had no idea about this series whatsoever. It was recommended to me by Alan over at the Library of Alexandria, and Tori and Pete and Ethan, that whole crew really wanted me to read the Long Price Quartet. I am halfway through it now, the most recent book being A Betrayal in Winter, and it is going up in the Hall of Heroes. This is a great book, you guys. It's fantasy only insofar as it's a fantastical realm. Yes, there's magic, but it's very, very limited. And the way that the author does magic is magicians or mages are really called poets, and they're able to capture the essence of these energies. And it's a little bit difficult to describe without doing an entire book review, but suffice it to say, the use of magic in Long Price Quartet, at least in the first couple of books, is highly limited. Maybe 3 or 4 pages out of the entire 300-page book. That said, the sheer vast amount of magic that these poets wield are devastating. They could be continent devastating. So it's not like the magic doesn't exist. It exists in a big way, but it's almost in some regard a deterrent. So the political machinations can happen and unfold as, you know, the people in power would like them to. Betrayal in Winter really covers the theme of succession of our leaders. I think that for me was really what I took away. And not only how we choose our new leaders, but should we always do it the way we've always done it before? And is there a better way? And Betrayal in Winter, I think, answers some of those questions that they pose in interesting and compelling ways. All right, let's move on. Another DNF challenge book. This one from Andrew at Andrew's Wizardly Reads gave me The Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe by Alex White. And I am going to put this in a Worthy Chronicle. I like this a lot better than Andrew did. Yeah, the characters were a little bit flat, but there was some pretty good space adventure here. There's a little bit of some mystery going on. There are some antagonists that seem a little bit overpowered, and we've got protagonists that have to sort out how to handle that. Not the greatest book I've ever read, but certainly not lost in space. I'm going to put it in Worthy Chronicle. All right. Now we are getting over to Blood Reunion by J.C.M. Byrne. This is book 3 in his Hybrid Helix series. And for me, Blood Reunion is going to be our first member of Champion's Choice. This is an A-level book for me. You know, Joe Byrne does some really interesting things. He's a funny guy just by nature, so he is able to insert humor in places in the book where it's not shoehorned in. He's just a naturally funny guy, and so you're going to get some good humor in this book. And you may have heard the Hybrid Helix series be described before as sort of like science fiction meets comic books meets space opera, and that's not really an incorrect genre blend. It's pretty close. I will say it's more serious, I think, in tone in places, and where it's appropriate. We do get quite a bit of compelling character work. We get a lot of backstory here, and the story is moving forward. So I really did enjoy Blood Reunion. It is Champion's Choice material for me. Let's get into our first Malazan book of the day. We are at Stephen Erikson's Dead House Gates. We're pulling up to the gates, folks, and those gates lead to the Hall of Heroes. Huge Malazan fan. I you know, I wasn't going to read Malazan last year, and I did a community poll, and if you're not a member of the channel, or sorry, if you're not a subscriber of the channel, now is as good a time as any to remind you that if you like these kinds of lists, and if you like my general sensibility, consider liking this video. And if you want to hang out a little bit more and get my takes on books and meet all kinds of cool other booktubers that I have here with me on the channel from time to time, think about subscribing to the channel. It really does help the channel grow. And if you want to help the channel grow even more, feel free to share the video with other people or your social networks or anybody you like. Anyway, Dead House Gates. I asked the community, do you want me to read Malazan? And they said absolutely yes. They're not wrong. All right, Hall of Heroes, Dead House Gates for sure. Now, on the other hand, let's go back to our DNF challenge. This one given to me by Josh over at Red Fury Books. And, uh-oh, did I forget to hit the... Let's just make sure I'm recording. I'm recording. Good. Okay, cool. See, this is live, guys, and I'm not redoing this, so there's going to be no editing. Anyways, okay, so this one was given to me by Josh at Red Fury Books. This is N.K. Jemison's The Fifth Season. With all due apologies to my friends that love the Broken Earth trilogy and who love the author and who love this book, it won my DNF challenge as the worst book that I read in the DNF challenge month. I did not like it. It is going into the pit of regret. I sussed out what was going on by chapter 3. And at that point, the book really held no interest for me. I did read the whole thing. I didn't DNF anything. I didn't DNF anything this year, by the way. I just don't DNF in general. So, pit of regret for the 5th season. Let's talk about Bad to the Throne. We are back in Eric Ueglen's world. This is the bad guys, I believe. And we have another member of Champion's Choice. If you're new to Lit RPG and the only thing you've ever listened to before is Dungeon Crawler Carl, I cannot recommend the Good Guys and the Bad Guys series high enough, particularly if you really enjoy Dungeon Crawler Carl. It's the closest series to me that has that similar sense of humor and sensibilities, while at the same time maintaining story, maintaining character moments, and having a really good supporting cast. So, Bad to the Throne, for me, Champion's Choice. Let's talk about The Black Crown by author John A. Douglas. All right. Dun, 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 dun. It's going into Champion's Choice as well. This is an A-level book for me, you guys. This is a D&D style of a book, but it does subvert some typical tropes. We have a main character, Ragoth, who is affectionately called Rags by his party members, is a half-orc, and that's problematic because the orcs have essentially ruined a lot of the kingdom, and they are killed on sight and hated, and he's had a very challenging upbringing, so to speak. And we have an adventure story, basically, and it's a good one, and it's cleverly written. The characters do have arcs. They do grow. For me, as a kind of a first book of his Age of Adventure series, it's a winner. I am recommending it, and it going into Champion's Choice. All right, talk about a champion. Let's go to Sir Terry Pratchett again. We're still in Discworld. We are in Book 3 of the City Watch arc, Feet of Clay. What I think about this one, it's going to Champion's Choice. Not quite the height of Men-at-Arms for me. I will say that I listened to this on audio, and while I do believe the audio narration is fantastic, I've decided for me the best way to do Terry Pratchett's Discworld is by sight reading it. I like to take my time with it. I think the man is brilliant, and I don't want to miss jokes, and I don't want to kind of have the jokes interpreted for me by the narrator in this case. I just like it a lot. I'm going to be returning to Discworld with Jingo very soon, and I will be sight reading it. But for sure, Champion's Choice. All right, let's talk about more Malazan. And we've got one of my new favorite characters makes his appearance in House of Chains. Where is the House of Chains? The House of Chains is in the Hall of Heroes. Witness, absolutely. This book starts off so different than all the other Malazan books that, came before, at least the first 3 that I've read. Those first 3 have a lot of sprawling world building. They've got lots of different character point of views. First, maybe, 25% of this book, maybe a little bit more, has to do with one character, and we get a real good character study on our guy Karsa. By the time we get to the end of the book, he is just entirely affected and changed by the events of the book. No spoilers here, but House of Chains easily in the Hall of Heroes. Let's get into He Who Fights with Monsters, book number 10 for me. This one is Champion's Choice. I love He Who Fights with Monsters mostly. We are on book 11. We're going to talk about book 11 here shortly. But book 10 did some really great things. The only thing I didn't like about it is that it left us on a cliffhanger. But Lit RPG books will do that from time to time. We have a very developed cast at this point into book 10. Our main character, Jason Asano, is less hateable in this book. If you've read the series, you probably know what I'm talking about. There are a lot of books that our main character, honestly, is just kind of hard to deal with. And in this book, he's not. He's cool again, so I liked it. Champion's Choice. All right, He Who Fights with Monsters, number 11. Let's just get right into this. Finish off He Who Fights with Monsters for the year. Lost in Space. Bummer, right? So book 11 for me. Every so often, the author, Shirtaloon, otherwise known as Travis Deverell, does something in these books that's real similar to what Brandon Sanderson does in Stormlight Archive, where he's got these different realms. And he's got what's called transformation zones for the most part. And he does it about every third or fourth book, where he spends most of the time in these zones. And to kind of give you an analogy, it would be like if a Stormlight book spent all of its time in the cognitive zone or the spiritual realm and really didn't get much onto Roshar itself. That's where we find ourselves with He Who Fights with Monsters 11. Lost in Space for me. But I suspect it's going to get good by book 12. Well, again in book 12. There's plenty of great entries in He Who Fights with Monsters. Let's talk about a Quilluminati book. The first one on our list today is Bernard Cornwell's historical fiction, The Last Kingdom. It's going right up here in Champion's Choice. Uhtred, son of Uhtred, Destiny is All, right? I never watched the TV show, so I went into this book entirely blind. What a great Quilluminati read. I will put a link in the description here, or maybe over my shoulder, to that conversation that I had with Mike and Philip and John when we talked about this book. But it accomplishes just an absolute ton in a pretty tight page count. I think one thing that, if you've only seen the TV show and you've not read the books before, that you might find of interest is that we get to spend considerably more time with Uhtred as a child in this book than they do apparently in the TV series. Compelling characters, very torn loyalties, I think, is the main theme of The Last Kingdom. Highly recommend. Champion's Choice for sure. I will be continuing along with Saxon Stories, not sure when. Let's talk about Meet Your Maker. This is by authors Jonathan McLean and Seth McDuffie. This is Lit RPG. I interviewed both of these guys on an episode of For Whom the Bell Tolls. Actually, I think we called it the Lit RPG live stream, and I will put a link as well to that if you want to check it out. So Meet Your Maker is book 1 in a proposed set of 5 books, and here is essentially the premise. We have an author who is on like book 10 or 11 of this big epic fantasy series, and he just kind of gets burned out writing it, and so he kills off his main character in about page 1 or page 2 of this book. And then he gets transported to the world that he is writing in. So there's a little bit of an isekai element to it, portal fantasy, progression fantasy. It's certainly Lit RPG. I got to tell you, for a first effort for Jonathan McLean, I know Seth McDuffie has written Lit RPG before. This is good stuff. And I'm going to put it tentatively in Worthy Chronicle, and I know I'm not ranking them within the tiers because I said that already, but it really does kind of crest the line between Champion's Choice and Worthy Chronicle. It's a book 1, and book 1 in Lit RPGs can be very challenging to do. I will say Jonathan rocks it when it comes to the voice acting. He absolutely crushes it. I can't wait for book 2. These guys are absolutely on to something. If you're new to Lit RPG or if you're a seasoned veteran, I recommend Meet Your Maker for sure. I would do it on audio if you like audiobooks, because Jonathan, he's done 250 audiobooks for a reason, you guys. He's really good at it. And I suspect this series, as it grows, will wind up overall in the Champion's Choice as a series. All right. GGK, Guy Gavriel K, The Lions of Al-Rassan. Where do the lions live? The lions live in the Hall of Heroes. Clearly, this is one of the top books I read in all of 2024. This is the second Guy Gavriel K book that I've read in my life, but by no means the last. I intend to read his entire catalog. The Lions of Al-Rassan, you may have heard it before. These guys, or this guy, Guy Gavriel K, absolutely kills it with historical fantasy fiction. This is sort of modeled after medieval Spain. We've got a fantasy version of the historical figure El Cid. Got a very tight cast. Not tons of magic, but just enough to keep it in the fantasy world. Lions of Al-Rassan, Hall of Heroes, 100%. Let's talk about A Shadow in Summer. This is Long Price Quartet Book 1. Daniel Abraham. It is going into the Champion's Choice. Why? Because it doesn't quite hit the heights for me as Betrayal in Winter, and it does enough that it's still an A-tier level book for sure. I didn't know anything about the series going into it. I was extremely pleasantly surprised once I found out what this series seems to be about. Shadow in Summer, Champion's Choice for sure. All right, let's keep moving on. Hey, we got our first Sun Eater book of this list, of which there's going to be 3 of them. Ashes of Man. Okay. All due respect to my friend, or hopeful one-day friend, Christopher Rocchio. I've only been on a live with him once, and there's other people there too. I'm putting it in a worthy chronicle. Ashes of Man, for me, did what it needed to do to progress the series. It was not my favorite story. I think that just in general with Sun Eater, it's so well architected out that and outlined that there's going to be parts that are going to be reader favorites, and there's going to be parts that are sort of lulls for the reader. And I think that that's really by design. For me, Ashes of Man is a little bit of a lull. There's some things that go on that I didn't love. I don't think I'm supposed to love it, but just subjectively speaking, for me, it's a worthy chronicle. Objectively speaking, it's probably in Champion's Choice. Let's keep going. Hey, we got another Sun Eater book. Disquiet Gods, on the other hand, going up in Champion's Choice. I really did like this book a lot. Actually, there's going to be 4 Sun Eater books in total. I like this book a lot. It's a return to form for me for the Sun Eater. There are elements that harken back to Howling Dark and to Demon in White in terms of content, which I liked a lot. It really kind of brought this series back at the forefront of my mind on why I do love Sun Eater so much. So it is Champion's Choice. The Torn Veil. This is an SPFBO book, so this is the self-published blog off. I was on Team Philip Chase. I was a sub-judge. I was given 6 books to read, and The Torn Veil was one of them. I think it's by Timothy J.R. Raines. My eyes are too weak to read the author name on here. I'm going to give this worthy chronicle. And again, you know, this is really subjective, right? Because do I think The Torn Veil is of the same caliber of Ashes of Man? No, I don't. It's just, we're making a tier list today, right? So The Torn Veil is basically a prequel to his Cracked Altar series. I liked it enough, for sure. It didn't move on to my finalist, but I liked it enough. You might want to check it out. Another SPFBO book, City of the Seventh Moon, I should say. We're going to also put that into Worthy Chronicle. And, you know, again, it's really strange. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing Worthy Chronicle of the Spiffbox book next to Ashes of Man. It doesn't seem super consistent to me, but I want to be authentic and give you guys my true feelings, I think, of each book. And it's hard to keep Ashes of Man in Worthy Chronicle, even though it is a B tier. But yeah, City of the Seventh Moon, honestly, it's kind of riding between Lost in Space and Worthy Chronicle. But because it is an author's debut, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. We're going to put it in Worthy Chronicle. All right. Dread Guide. Dread Guide? Dread God. I wish it was a Dread Guide, because Dread God was Lost in Space for me. You know, I have famously said I don't love Cradle. I did all the entire series between 2023 and 2024 because I do so much lit RPG here on the channel. I felt like this Cultivation series was an important one to have under my belt just to establish some credibility in the genre. And because of the fact that I didn't like how books 1, 2, or 3 started, it was challenging to get to the middle books, let alone the finale. Dread God for me did a couple of things that I thought were okay, but ultimately still lost in space for me. The Handwarmers of Immortality. All right, this is author Karen McCompastine, another Spiffbox book. So the general premise here is we have a Highlander parody. And yeah, I'm talking about the 1986 movie starring Christopher Lambert, I don't know. He's French. It's probably Lambert. Anyway, love Highlander, the movie. There are elements of Handwarmers of Immortality that are really good, that would put it into worthy chronicle for me. It rides the line between Lost in Space and Worthy Chronicle. I'm going to put it in Lost in Space only because the author does a mechanism of breaking the fourth wall, and that's okay to do. However, it's done, in my opinion, overly much. There's like notes to the editor that are included in the book by design. Didn't quite work for me. I like Highlander a ton. I liked what she did, and she's funny, right? I mean, there are funny aspects of this book for sure, but the breaking of the fourth element, of the fourth wall element of this series, or of this book, I should say, was a little bit over. I don't know. I think it was just cumbersome. It just happened too often. Anyway, it's going to go into Lost in Space, but Karen, still love your book. You're good. All right. Wings Spread. This is Lit RPG. This is a book 1 by Sean Oswald, again narrated by the amazing Neil Helligers, putting it into Worthy Chronicle. Book 1s in Lit RPG are notoriously challenging to do. He did a really unique thing here where he's got a dragon who is assuming human form and meeting up with a new bestie, and she's very cool, and they're off to go on an adventure to ultimately wind up in an academy. Now, I know some of you guys don't love Academy books, and there's really no Academy much to this book. I think that's probably going to happen in book 2, which I haven't read yet. But I think Wings Spread is a really good debut, and it's putting it into Worthy Chronicle. Let's talk about one of the strangest books I've read in my life, let alone last year. This is another DNF Challenge book. This was given to me by Philip Chase. This is The Worm Ouroboros. It was written pre-Tolkien. This book is over 100 years old. It reads like a tale of yore, of epic. This one surprised me. This is one of the biggest surprises of 2024 for me because I am putting The Worm Ouroboros in Champion's Choice. And it's really a strange book, you guys. I mean, you read chapter 1 and you're introduced to these two characters who then are never seen or heard from again in the book. They don't die. They don't run off somewhere. They're just gone and they don't come back. And so it's really weird. Chapter 1 is like a book in and of itself. And then chapter 2 starts our actual story. There are elements of the book that I did find a little bit repetitive, a little bit kind of unoriginal, yet at the same time, what am I saying when I'm saying unoriginal? This is pre-Lord of the Rings, right? Gandalf did not exist yet when The Worm Ouroboros was written. So to say that it's derivative, it's not. It's just very stylized. I think that's probably the best way I can describe it. If you ever decide to read the book, I think you'll probably agree with me in the fact that it is stylized. Whether or not you like it or not, I don't know. I can see it being in somebody's Hall of Heroes. I can see it being in somebody's Pit of Regret. So, yeah. Anyway, let's keep going on. Two Lies, Two Thrones. We are back into the world of the good guys and the bad guys. And I think Two Lies, Two Thrones is going to go in Worthy Chronicle. I really liked this book a lot. Again, Neil Helligers rocks it out. Two Lies, Two Thrones. Another solid entry by Eric Uglin. Let's keep moving. Another Illuminati book. Ordinary Grace by fellow Minnesotan William Kent Kruger. Literary fiction. unexpected. Mike picked this book out, and boy, did I enjoy this book. I would have never read it otherwise if not for the Quilluminati. That's the whole point of our reading book club. Ordinary Grace, easily champion's choice for me. This is a character study more than anything else about a family and their close friends who live in small town rural Minnesota in the 1960s. Yes, there are murders going on. And yes, it is a little bit of a murder mystery, but I would submit that that's not the entirety of this story. This story is learning about characters, and it's learning about compassion and, not to throw the title into it, but it's learning to have grace, so to speak. Watch the Quilluminati video about it for more information, but big recommend for me, William Kent Kruger, Ordinary Grace. Let's move on to Patient Zero. This is a gift from my brother in the South, John Minton, over at Talking Story. This is a book that I'm surprised that I liked as much as I did. It's going into Champion's Choice. Joe Ledger series. This is book 1. I never figured myself for a government thriller supernatural story. And lo and behold, I absolutely loved this. This is a rip-roaring page-turner. I loved the main character. I believed the main character. And for me, that's a big piece. When we have a central point of view, like we do with Joe Ledger, it has to be a pretty strong main character, or I'm just going to lose interest in the series. We get a great one here. Patient Zero, into Champion's Choice. Okay, Demon in White, we are back into the Sun Eater. Mr. Rocchio has a spot in the Hall of Heroes. Demon in White really rides the fence for me between that and Howling Dark for the best of the Sun Eater so far. I am really looking forward to his finale coming out sometime at the end of this year, I think. But Demon in White does some things that are highly original, and yet you can see where Christopher Rocchio does get his influences. If you've watched this channel, you know I'm a huge fan of Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. There are elements of Book of the New Sun here. There are elements of Dune all over Sun Eater, but not really, straight copy and pasted. It's more influential than it is derivative. Demon in White, highly unique, terrific storytelling, high quality prose, tremendous character work, Hall of Heroes all the way. Speaking of the Hall of Heroes, both in personal life and in literature, boom, Janny Wurts is in the Hall of Heroes with To Ride Hell's Chasm. I had long heard about the Wars of Light and Shadow, but I had also long heard about Janny Wurts' writing style can be challenging. I think that is overblown, if I'm being straight with you guys. I think that Janny Wurts' writing style is unique to Janny Wurts, but after you read a couple of chapters, your brain will pick it up and you'll read this book, just as you would most other books. Really only the fact is that she's got some words that are outside of normal vocabulary sometimes, but you know what? It's cool. I like learning new words. She doesn't invent a whole lot of new things out of the blue. She just uses, inventive, yes, she does. I want to be very clear about this. These stories are inventive, but when it comes to language, she uses words that are absolutely in the English dictionary, but they're perfect. She is the queen of finding the perfect place to put the perfect word. To Ride Hell's Chasm is absolutely a phenomenal standalone. And I read this because I wanted to get a sense of her style of storytelling before I would ever commit myself to reading this gigantic series that I've now started, The Wars of Light and Shadow. I love To Ride Hell's Chasm. I recommend it hugely. My mom is actually reading To Ride Hell's Chasm right now and also enjoying it. Great character work, great and moving plot. It doesn't slow down. The magic is cool. It's more sorcery-like than particular, magic system per se. But we have character growth. We have character depth. There are some very high-quality themes explored in not a heavy-handed way. So yeah, To Ride Hell's Chasm, easily. Hall of Heroes. All right, I have to keep moving through this and we're going to be here forever. All right, on the other hand, Clive Barker, another DNF challenge book. This one given to me by Madison Goodyear right squarely in the pit of regret for me. I know a lot of you guys love Clive Barker. I know, like John at Talking Story loves Weave World, and I think Mike does as well. This book didn't work for me. And the sad thing is that it had one of the best antagonists I've ever read. Literally, the villain was just fantastic. And for it to be in the pit of regret with that high caliber of a villain has to inform you how much I did not like this book. Very, very little. There were some ideas that I thought were extremely clever, but just in general, the book, I don't know, it just kind of got under my skin in the wrong way, so it is going into the pit of regret. Let's talk about The Primal Hunter. This is book 1, lit RPG, The Primal Hunter. We're calling it a worthy chronicle. It probably as a series will wind up in Champion's Choice for me. I don't think it's going to hit the highs of a Dungeon Crawler Carl, which, by the way, I didn't do any Dungeon Crawler Carl books last year because I was current and I'd read them all in 2023. Or actually, I've been reading them as they've been, published in audio. But that's a Hall of Heroes series, Dungeon Crawler Carl. Primal Hunter, I think, will end up in Champion's Choice for me. Book 1, it starts off pretty good. I actually liked it. And there's some cool things that the author Zogarth does with the universe itself, so to speak. And I'll just tell you to go read and find out. So Primal Hunter, it is a worthy chronicle. All right, my fellow Minnesotan author, Nick Horvath, writes a action hero from the 80s, or at least that's the style, in Sledge versus the Labyrinth. Okay, now I like Sledge. I like his sensibilities. I like the fact that when I pick up a Sledge book now, I know exactly what I'm in for. I am not in for Deadhouse Gates complexity, right? I am not in for Janny Wurts level of prose. I am in for a great time. I am in for a book that I can read when I just want to have an adventure and see some kick-ass kicking ass. And that's what we get with Sledge. Now, where's it going to go? It's going to go in Worthy Chronicle. And the only reason it's not going into Champion's Choice is because the ending didn't work for me. Now, I suspect with book 2 coming out whenever Nick Horvath puts it out, that could easily end up in Champion's Choice because this one almost did. If not for the ending of the book, it would have been there already. It's a weird book. It's a revenge story. It sort of reads like a video game a little bit, but certainly not lit RPG. It's not progression at all. Sledge is one bad mofo. I recommend it if you like 80s action films. Next one is also a DNF challenge book. This one given to me by Kay over at Kay's Hidden Shelf. Nayari. I don't even remember this book hardly, although I do remember reading it and going, why am I reading this book? Thank you, Kayla, for giving me this book because it was a novella and it was over almost as quickly as it began. Yeah, pit of regret. What is not in the pit of regret is David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. That's going in the Hall of Heroes. And this one is interesting. I've talked a lot about Cloud Atlas on this channel before. If you go back and check out the BellTube catalog into season 1, you're going to find quite a bit on Cloud Atlas. I'm going to just say real quickly here that his method of storytelling is so absolutely distinctive and unique and versatile. There are 6 stories in this book, and you may have heard that it explores the stories. We get the first half of the stories, in sequential order, and then we get the second half of the stories moving back reverse in time. And that's a great mechanism to do, but I think the most impressive thing about Cloud Atlas for me is David Mitchell himself. He is writing all kinds of genres within this one book, and he's doing it extraordinarily with an expert hand. There's science fiction in here for sure. This does belong in the science fiction section of the bookstore, not literary fiction. Why it's in literary fiction, I will never understand. This is a science fiction book, but there are mystery elements, there are historical fiction types of elements, and like I said, there is absolutely a ton of sci-fi here. Cloud Atlas, Hall of Heroes. Let's keep going. Ooh, let's flip some tables. Brandon Sanderson. Well, if you're new to the channel, there's a chance that you found me through my Wind and Truth review, and I would like to say thank you, by the way, to everybody who has recently subscribed to the channel. You guys are really amazing, and I think I did a pretty fair job in my review of Brandon Sanderson's Wind and Truth. where would I put this? And please understand, I put both the first and second books of Stormlight Archive in S tier, okay? And up until Rhythm of War, and even through Rhythm of War, the Stormlight Archive has been in my top 10 fantasy series of all time. So it is with tremendous regret and disappointment and sadness that I am putting Wind and Truth and Lost in Space. It didn't do what I needed it to do. Now, is it a better book subjectively than a lot of books in Worthy Chronicle? Yes. Am I holding Brandon Sanderson to a higher standard because of who he is? Also, yes. This is book 5 in the giant arc that is his magnum opus, his self-described magnum opus. So I think he put the onus on himself to really deliver an impactful punch as we end our first arc in Stormlight Archive. And for me, you guys, this book fell extremely flat. It was a 3 out of 5 for me. Not a 1, not a 2, but not a 4 or a 5. And it does ride the line between, I'll say, Worthy Chronicle and Lost in Space. I know I'm not supposed to be ranking these within the categories, but there's just so much here that I didn't understand. I felt like, in some regard, you go watch the video, but the amount of heavy-handedness with the themes that he did in this book and the overall sheer enormity of the page count that clearly was not required, right? I mean, I'm cool with a 1,300-page book, and we're going to talk about one here shortly that needed every one of those pages. This one did not. It's going in Lost in Space. I'll put the review up here if you want to take a look at it. Larry Correa. This is the Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. This is book 4, Tower of Silence. Silence? Told you this is live. Anyways, it's going into Champion's Choice. I love Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. We've got sentient swords. We've got pulse-pounding thriller fantasy in a way that is highly unique to this series. I've not read anything like it before. If you've not read anything by Larry Correa, and you may have heard of Monster Hunter International, I've heard of it. I haven't read any of those books yet, and I started this series based on Madison Goodyear's recommendation. She did not steer me wrong. Champion's Choice. All right, back to Kingdoms of Death in the Sun Eater. Okay, it's going to go into Worthy Chronicle, just like Ashes of Man. Now, here's the deal with Kingdoms of Death, and I'm not going to do a whole review, or like I said, we'll be here till March. But is it a subjectively good book? Yeah, it is. But it read a lot like Dark Age to me with Pierce Brown, in the fact that it's a depressing book. And maybe it's just a me thing, but I was not really in the mental space at the time to be dealing with a book that our protagonist, Hadrian Marlowe, goes through more stuff in this book in a negative way than he does in all the other books combined, at least in my opinion. And like I'd mentioned with Ashes of Man, this series is going to have high moments where we're rooting and excited for our character, and the low moments where we're just super bummed out about what's going on. And we got a lot of that in Kingdoms of Death. I also thought that the first part of this book was a little bit derivative of elements in Book of the New Sun. Not copy and paste. I don't mean to say that, because it's not. But there were some glaring examples where I was like, man, this is a heavy nod to Gene Wolfe. And there were times where I was just not sure if, I don't know, it seemed like it was a little bit heavy. But Kingdoms of Death, honestly, it's a good book. It's just, for me, within the Sun Eater, it's a Worthy Chronicle. All right, let's keep going. Dungeon in the Clouds. This is by Daniel Weber. This is a Dungeon Core lit RPG book, and this was provided to me by Sound Booth Theater. I want to thank Justin James for sending me this book. He did a killer job narrating. If you guys don't know already, Sound Booth Theater is the company that does Dungeon Crawler Carl, as well as hundreds, if not thousands, of other audiobooks at this point. This one didn't let me down, and I don't like Dungeon Core books, so I'm going to put it in Worthy Chronicle. I actually liked the book, and I was surprised because I told Justin, dungeon core books really aren't my thing. And if you're unaware what that is, that's when our main character is the dungeon itself. It's a sentient dungeon that has to grow, and the more it grows, it learns how to expand its dungeon. It can create new wings. It can create new architecture. It can create all kinds of crazy monsters and traps for the heroes that are going to come explore the dungeon. Dungeon in the Clouds is pretty unique. I liked it. I'm going to do book 2. Don't know when, but Worthy Chronicle. Let's move on to Will White's Reaper. Okay, this one for me, I'm going to put into Worthy Chronicle. This is about as high as, Cradle gets for me. You guys already know, I've talked about it ad nauseum, that Cradle did not work, but for me, Reaper was probably one of the top 2 or 3 books. I think Ghostwater might have been my favorite one, but I did that in the prior year. All right, let's keep going. Okay, now I said I wasn't going to rank these books within the category. I lied. The Anjin-san, Shogun, James Clavell, boom! All the way at the very tip top of the Hall of Heroes. This was my book of the year for 2024. So when I mentioned earlier that sometimes you do need 1,300 pages to get to the point, this one needed every page, and it was absolutely worth it. I loved Shogun. I cannot believe it took me this long in life to actually read it. And this is, the value of BookTube to me, right? Because there's a lot of FOMO, right? People start talking about these books and you want to read them too. And Shogun was talked about quite a bit in 2023, and I finally got around to it by 2024. Mainly prodded because the series was coming out and there had been some trailers and it looked awesome. And I'm kind of a guy that likes to read the book first and then watch the adaptation. The adaptation is fantastic. I will say I actually preferred the book, even though I think it's an S-tier TV miniseries as well. The acting is so good in that show. But there are some elements in Shogun, the book, that there's flat out not enough time to do in one series, in one season of a miniseries. And that is the exploration of a lot of the Japanese characters. And we get a little bit deeper backstory in some of those fantastic characters. Shogun, for me, easily at the top of the Hall of Heroes. It's an all-timer for me. All right, Warhog Paladins. This is another SPFBO book. I'm going to put it in... Gosh, I hate to do this, but Lost in Space. It sort of rides the line between Lost in Space and Worthy Chronicle. It was okay for me. I actually reviewed this book, and I had to go back and do an apology video because I had thought it was a different book when I was reviewing it. And I actually reviewed a different book instead of this one. Got all mixed up. This one, for me, I think is going to improve as the series gets better. Lost in Space, I don't mean to make anybody think, well, it's just Lost. It's just my name for a C tier today. It's a high C. It's maybe a C+, I think. But I think that this series will improve. There's definitely room for growth. Let's talk about The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. Now, I know that this has been a BookTube darling since it came out. I believe it won SPFBO, and I think it did. Anyway, Sword of Kaigen came to me really out of FOMO because so many people were talking about that this is just the greatest indie book ever written in the fantasy genre. And that's the thing about BookTube, right? You can align with your favorite BookTuber 95% of the time, and that's great. But that still leaves 5% where you're just not going to see eye to eye. And for me, The Sword of Kaigen, I do not see eye to eye on. It's a lot of people's favorite book. I will put it into Worthy Chronicle, and for me, that's being generous. There are elements of this book that are wholly unnecessary. There are backstory elements that don't make much sense, given the fact that the series has been abandoned. Same with the world building. That would be great if we didn't leave sort of on a cliffhanger and the author decided not to write anymore in the series. Again, it kind of felt like we didn't need to do that, so it was a disappointment there. There's some character growth in the second half of the book that I just didn't buy. I felt like we have a mature character who's an adult that essentially develops such personal growth in a handful of pages that it just didn't seem authentic to me. It seemed like that type of a character arc and the growth would require at least 2 books, maybe even 3, to get from where the character started to where the character wound up. Just didn't seem wholly believable to me. That's why I'm putting it into Worthy Chronicle. It's not a bad book at all. I mean, there are elements about Sortakaigen, particularly the first half of the book, that I actually liked a lot. I think the fact that I came into it with such expectations because it has been such a booktube darling that I thought this thing was going to be easily a top 10 book of the year. Instead, it was my most disappointing book of the year only because of my expectations. Another disappointing book for me, it's actually going to be lower and it's going into Lost in Space, is Awaken Online Timeless by Travis Bagwell. Yeah, this is lit RPG, and I normally love Awaken Online. And that's the thing, when you get into these larger lit RPG series, it's almost inevitable that you're going to get some clunkers. And I think that that is truly the magic of Dungeon Crawler Carl, where we've got 7 books and they're all hits. It doesn't always happen, right? And Awaken Online is a great example of a book here that kind of misses the mark. Most of Awaken Online I absolutely love. This one deals with a time travel mechanic, and again, I'm not going to get too in detail. Time travel's hard to do as an author, and you got to be very good to keep the reader aware of the mechanic of the time travel. And in this particular instance, I was lost in space. Not a great read for me. Let's move on to an absolutely great read. This was my first book in Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Of course, we're talking about Gardens of the Moon, and Gardens of the Moon is in the Hall of Heroes. You talk about a book that I should have read years ago. If not for the BellTube community voting in Gardens of the Moon last February in our free community poll, I don't know that I would have even started Malazan Book of the Fallen last year. I probably would not have, because it wasn't really on my radar. And you guys, this has vaulted clearly. Check this out. We got Dead House Gates right here. We got House of Chains. We got Gardens of the Moon. They're all in the Hall of Heroes for me. And Gardens of the Moon is no exception. It starts, right off in the midst of a battle, and it does not let up. There are some incredible moments that, in a book 1 of a brand new author, I just fell in love with. Let's keep moving. The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. All right, so I got a hot take here. I know a lot of people love The Black Tongue Thief, and I think if I would have read it by sight reading, I would have loved it too. However, I chose to do this on Audible. And the narrator is actually the author, Christopher Buehlman, and he chose to do this with a very, very thick brogue accent. And 9 out of 10 people absolutely love that accent, and this book is magical on audio. I'm in the 10% that didn't love the accent. It was distracting to me. I didn't hear all the words. I just kind of got caught up in the minutia of trying to understand the language rather than the story. So for me, The Black Tongue Thief is lost in space. But I will say, if I go back and reread this book, you know what? I'm going to put it in the Worthy Chronicle because it is a good book. It's just the way that I experienced it wasn't to my taste. But if I'm just judging the book itself rather than the audio performance, which I think I should do, it's in Worthy Chronicle. All right. What's not a Worthy Chronicle is The Wandering Inn by Pirate Abba. So again, I know a lot of you guys that are into lit RPG absolutely love The Wandering Inn. For me, this is not a series that I'm going to be continuing, at least not in the immediate future. This is 43 hours of audiobook. I was bored for at least 41 of those 43 hours. The main character was okay. The side characters were a little bit more compelling to me than the main character. I thought the main character was extraordinarily vanilla. And as this thing went on, I just found myself wanting it to end. Now, I understand that the author, Pirate Abba, has apparently gone back and rewritten several sections of this first book in The Wandering Inn. However, that did not translate to audio. They didn't go back and redo the audio. I wish they would have, because I would think with the success of The Wandering Inn that there would be ample opportunity to go back and do an edit to the audio and present the book in its final form rather than having to scour online to go read it. Didn't work for me, guys. Wandering Inn, sadly, pit of regret. I just didn't like the book, and I think maybe because of the fact that it was so long, that's informing pit of regret as well, because if this book was, say, 12 hours, it might have ended up in Lost in Space, but it just beat me down, you guys. The Wandering Inn wandered right onto my brain and not in a good way. But another good book that did land well is Outlaw by Angus MacDonald, and it is going into Champion's Choice. This is an exciting book that is a retelling of the Robin Hood and his band of merry men. It's a great book. I didn't know I needed this book in my life, and one of our amazing patrons, Heidi, sent me this book. And Heidi, I don't know how you knew I would like this book, but you were right. It's a Champion's Choice book for me. If you guys like Robin Hood, if you want a standalone adventure in between a bunch of big series, give it a try. All right, let's keep moving. All right, we're on the final row. Cool. The Gallant by Janny Wurts. This is a prequel novella to the Wars of Light and Shadow. And where is this going? It's going in the Hall of Heroes. Now, why is it in the Hall of Heroes? It's in the Hall of Heroes because she does in 108 pages what other authors on this list couldn't do in 800 pages. There are so many impactful, punchy moments in a 108-page novella that it knocked my socks off. It absolutely did. The Gallant is something that I just kind of read going into reading this Wars of Light and Shadow just because it was available. It's $3 on our website. I said, you know what? Let's go ahead and do it. Very glad that I did. The main character in the Gallant, I don't know. You know what? I blame the guys over at Talking Story because they keep calling it the Gallant. It's not. It's called the Gallant. The main character in the Gallant shows up in the first book of the Wars of Light and Shadow, which is Curse of the Mistwraith. Hall of Heroes. Let's keep going. All right. Not in the Hall of Heroes. The Will White Waybound, the last book of Cradle, Lost in Space. Not horrible, but in my opinion, a huge missed opportunity. This book really gets us off the planet, and there's so many adventures that Will White could have given us here that sadly I think was just a big missed opportunity. I really did enjoy, and I should say this, I really did enjoy Travis Baldry's narration throughout this entire series. This guy is an S-tier audiobook narrator for sure, but not even him could raise this book past Lost in Space. Now, you can see the next book is Stephen Erikson's Memories of Ice, I should say. And it's going into the Memories of the Hall of Heroes because it's so good. It's actually my favorite Malazan book that I've read so far, and it's real close between this and House of Chains. It's just, on any given day type of a decision. Memories of Ice, just so many impactful, emotional moments. It is a journey. You will be tired when you finish this book, but in the best way. There are character moments here that I've not read in the thousands of fantasy books that I've read in my life. It's unique. It's mind expanding. It is thought provoking. There are a million threads that are being woven, and yet they find ways to converge in unexpected manners. Memories of Ice, easily in the Hall of Heroes for me. Here's a tough one. Do androids dream of electric sheep? Okay, so I've talked about this book quite a bit because Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies. I'm putting it into Worthy Chronicle. On any other given day, it could be in Champion's Choice. I think the issue with me with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? See, this is what happens when I talk for an hour. The issue is expectations. I expected to love this book as much as I love the movie Blade Runner, and That's almost impossible to do because the story is entirely different. The only thing that's really similar are, the characters, but beyond that, it's its own story. And I really did like the story. And I think in retrospect, if I go back and think about this in the future, it'll probably land in Champion's Choice, but I don't know. For me, it's a worthy chronicle. We're going to leave it at that. I do recommend the book, though, and it's very short. You can read that book in a day easily. Let's talk about The Tenacious Tale of Tana the Tender Sword by authors Dewey Conway and Bill Adams. This is a Spiffbo book. This happened to be my finalist. This is the one of the 6 books that I put through to Philip Chase, and it turns out he agreed, and he put it through as Team Chase's finalist. The Tenacious Tale. There's only one place that this could go, and that's in Champion's Choice, because Tana is a champion in training. This book is a middle grade book. If you'd have told me at the beginning of the year that I would be reading a middle grade book, I would have said, you're nuts. I'm so glad I read this. I'm so glad I got to, know these authors after I read it. It's fantastic. I can't wait for book 2. Big recommend for me, both for adults and middle grade. Huge recommend. All right, let's talk about All the Horses of Ireland. And this one, I'll put it into, this one was recommended to me by Evie, as she was only Evie. I'm going to put it in Lost in Space for me. I thought it was okay. And again, I want to be real clear on this category title. It's not like the book lost me. It's just a sci-fi C-tier book, or C-tier title name. All the Horses of Iceland. God, I keep calling it Ireland. I've done that now in a million videos. All the Horses of Iceland is okay, but to be honest, I barely remember it at all, and that's why it is Lost in Space. Another book that I do remember quite well, Never Die by Rob J. Hayes. Boom! Easily in Champion's Choice. This is a standalone adventure. This is a Eastern sensibilities, heroes quest, found family, motley crew. You blend those all together and you get Never Die. And I will say it is difficult to surprise me in fantasy books because at some point I feel like I've read it all before, but Rob J. Hayes surprised me in this book. There are some things that happen that I never saw coming a mile away, or even a foot in front of me. And big recommend for Never Die for me. Champion's Choice. Let's talk about Shadow of the Gods. This is John Gwynne. Boom. Champion's Choice. Another great book from John Gwynne. I am a big Faithful and the Fallen fan. I will be continuing this. This is book 1 in the Bloodsworn saga. Really did enjoy this book a lot. Through just my TBR mountain, it has become very difficult to continue the series. I'm going to complete the entirety of Bloodsworn sometime in the second quarter of 2025. But yeah, Champion's Choice, John Gwynne, just a master of writing battle scenes and compelling characters. Here's another Quilluminati book, The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. All right, this is going into Worthy Chronicle. Why? Because I think the structure is unique and cool. I will say chapter 1 is Hall of Heroes. Chapter 1 reads to me like the best kind of Doctor Who episode, and then it kind of goes downhill from there for me. I think I gave it I want to say 3.5 stars, something like that. It was okay. I will read A Spear Cuts Through Water at some point. It's not on my immediate to-do list, but if you want to know more about my thoughts on Vanished Birds, check out the Quilluminati video. I believe that one is on Mike's channel. All right, we're getting down to it. Darktown by Palmer Pickering. This is a lit RPG adventure. It's going into Worthy Chronicle. This is a book 1. There's some really good things about this book. I've talked about it on the channel before. There are some elements of the lit RPG part that were too simplistic for me as a lit RPG fan that I wished were explored more in detail than more generic that happened here. But I do like the main character. I do like the main character's sidekick a ton. I am looking forward to reading book 2. Very good chance book 2 ends up in Champion's Choice. The Fealty of Monsters. Now, this is another SBFBO book. And I am putting it, this is by Lades or Lads or Ladies. I don't know how to pronounce the name. I've asked 1,000 times. I don't think the author's ever seen the show. It's going into the pit of regret. Didn't like the book that much. Don't want to talk too poorly about Spiff box books because it takes courage to enter the competition. But for me, wasn't a winner. Just move on. All right, the last book on the list, and then we'll wrap it up. Dune Messiah. All right, so I will say Dune on any given day is my favorite science fiction book. Sometimes it's Hyperion. Most of the time it's Dune. So when we talk about Dune Messiah, for one, it's amazing I haven't read this book already, right? And I did, and I was not in love with it as much as I wanted it, to be in love with it, and that's why it's going into Worthy Chronicle. It's a middle book to me. It basically starts off 12 years after Paul Atreides' events in the book Dune and the aftermath of what happened at the end of Dune. And it's just, I don't know, I didn't really like the direction of the story. And I suspect when I read the next book in Dune, Dune Messiah may move up to Champion's Choice because it will be an integral step and a necessary step to get to the next book, which I think is Children of Dune. I think in some regard, it's a little bit like Ashes of Man and Kingdoms of Death in that it's a stepping stone book to the next book for me. Now, I know plenty of people that would put Dune Messiah in the Hall of Heroes, but BellTube community, I have to be honest with you, that's where we're at. All right, you guys, we just ranked 63 books that I read on that I read in 2024. If you stuck around for this entire video, I want to say thank you so much. This has been an amazing reading year. And again, if you would be so kind to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it to your socials, that helps us grow. If you'd like to see me do more tier lists, please do leave a comment below and let me know what kind of tier lists you'd like to see. If you vehemently agree with me or totally disagree with me, can you vehemently agree? I don't know. We've been talking over an hour, so who knows where my mind's at. If you totally agree with me about some of these, let me know in the comments. If you totally disagree with me in a polite way, please let me know that in the comments too. We're all about discussion and conversation here on the channel, and I do respond to all the comments, as you guys know. This has been a lot of fun. I like doing tier lists. They're fun to make, and it actually helps remind me about all these amazing reads that I had last year. That's what I've got for you. We're not going to do a one for the road today, but of course I will give you this. Here's your fortune.